Hey guys, good to see you again. I asked my class probably about 4 weeks ago in class why they used Chrome. And the point was to show that people use what everybody else uses. There is a point, of course, in technology when people are using it for other reasons. But once something becomes the max, right? Once it becomes what people use, um, they actually just choose it because that's what everybody else is doing. And when I asked that, I could see a shocked look on most people's faces in there. And that's because you're right, we're in technology. We don't do that. We choose for a reason. And so I asked them, why did you choose it then? I'm very willing to change my opinion if you can actually tell me why you're actually using it. And of course, nobody really responded. And the reason why is because, well, the truth is they were using it or are using it because that's what everybody uses. There isn't a certain feature that they wanted. Uh, most people think it's the fastest, and that's because Google told them it was the fastest when it was. 15 years ago? I can't remember when that came out. And hey, it's the fastest thing out there. And it was, but it isn't anymore. And that's usually the way it goes, right? The more we want from a browser, the more we want from software, the slower it's going to be because we want it to do all these different things. And that's harder for the processor to do. Sorry, I paused myself there. So sorry if I jumped screens really quick. Had to take care of something. My point is that that's normally what people do in society is we went through those social theories. Those social theories are based off of observing how people function and what they do. That's where they come from, right? They don't just make this stuff up. They watch what people are doing and go, "Oh, this is how people behave," right? That's basically what a social theory is, a theory on how society functions. In any case, you can take anything like I also mentioned in class that people that just always buy Fords or they always buy Chevys or they always buy Dodges. They always just buy the same type of vehicle without ever evaluating what's out there. That's who we are. That's what we tend to do. Somebody asked me, well, if that's the case, then well, what do you use? And I said, well, I've been using Opera GX because it's a version of Opera. I've always liked Opera. Opera is normally the fourth largest. It's not very used. But hey, fourth largest, right? That means hundreds and hundreds of thousands of users. I've always liked Opera. It's always worked well, and I haven't really seen any major difference between browsers that much at all. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and share my screen here. Well, it is shared, but let's make sure it is. It is. There we are. And that's a picture I just downloaded that I needed. And this is Chrome that you're looking at here. This is Chrome, except I should be truthful. It's Chromium, right? This is Microsoft's Edge, and Microsoft couldn't get any traction anymore, right? Internet Explorer is the old thing, and so they actually, just dumped Internet Explorer. It's still on your computer if you want to use it, and they made Edge, and Edge was fast, and it was much faster than Chrome, very secure, and nobody cared. It's like, whatever, Microsoft, we use Chrome. So Microsoft decided, okay, well, we'll use what Chrome is based off of, which is Chromium, because that is an open source project. Yeah, many years ago, Google got into that whole, hey, we're really cool, so we'll do open source stuff. And so it's out there. So anybody can go make a browser off of Chromium, and you can make it, Chrome, or you can make it Edge, or you can call it your own name, right? So that this, you'll notice it looks very familiar, and especially this portion when you download stuff across the bottom. Wow, that looks like Chrome. As a matter of fact, if I started up Edge on most people's computers, if it's the new Edge, they wouldn't even know. They'd go, oh, that's Chrome, right? I haven't seen any difference between using that or using Opera, this is Opera GX. Why did I choose it? Well, Opera came out and said, hey, we've got this Opera GX and we're going to make it just for gamers that are, twitching. And I don't use Twitch, so I don't stream anything off Twitch. But I thought, hey, that's interesting. I'm going to look at that because what they wanted to do was make the super light browser so it wouldn't interfere with the streaming. And I thought, well, if it's a super light browser that's not going to interfere with streaming, I want to see how it actually functions just as a regular browser, just to use it. And I do like the interface, the way it's all dark, and you can take that off and it's outlined. You change these colors and such. So far, I haven't had any problems with it. I've gone to website after website and just functions. But that happens with technology. There's a span of technology where a company is the best and it's the greatest at whatever it is that they came out with. So if we use this example, if we use Google, man, there was a huge, massive difference between using Google as a search and using Yahoo as a search back in the day. Google is what it is now because the Google search algorithms were so fantastic. Well, you only have a certain amount of time before everybody catches up to you, right? And so that's always the way it's been, right? So you have Microsoft Office out there, and the only way Microsoft Office has stayed at the top is because, millions of business users around the world use it because of its features, because of its ease of use, and they have pushed that and stayed really out in the forefront. And so they didn't get there that way, but they stay at the forefront of that because Google Docs doesn't really compete. And even OpenOffice, which is the next best one, I would use LibreOffice. It's definitely doable, but in business use, you're probably going to go with what Microsoft has because of all the features it has. That's staying ahead of the game. That's forcing people to keep up with you. But most of the time, again, Windows is the one that it dominates the desktop. But back in the 90s, which we talk a little more about later, Linux came out. And Linux was this free operating system that you could use. And it was very comparable to Windows. That scared Microsoft a lot. Now, I want to take a look at this. I've been building to this topic of the dark side of the tech business. The dark side of the tech business is when anybody starts to get a real monopoly over something, they tend to switch from innovation to I'm going to control you through my might and power. And that's what this video is about. If you want to look at it, it's out on Nostalgia Nerd. That's not the Nostalgia Nerd. That's just his kid, I believe. But Microsoft actually put in a hidden self-destruct code back when it was dealing with MS-DOS. So you're going back to the early 90s for this. There was another operating system out there, and we look at this person, and this was DR-DOS or Dr. DOS. Lots of people called it Dr. DOS. DR-DOS stood for Digital Research Disk Operating System, and it was a direct competitor and totally compatible with MS-DOS. So what Microsoft did is it was gaining popularity. Why? Because it was better. Microsoft DOS always pretty much was lagging behind, and I used it and loved it, to tell you the truth. But I had to acknowledge the fact, just because of who I am, that it was behind. It really was. It was not something that was the biggest and the best. Let's just put it that way. It was good enough. It was always good enough, good enough, good enough. And so what was happening is because it was totally compatible with MS-DOS and it also included multitasking and all this really fancy stuff, Microsoft couldn't, well, they could have, right? It's like, should we compete on innovation and innovate something better, or do we just crush them with our might? And so what they did was, of course, partly they went out and made deals. So this was a big deal back then. And honestly, I was too young to really, I was about your age, and so I didn't really pay much attention to it. But if you're Dell, Compaq was a huge one. So I know Dell became really huge, but Compaq, which now is a part of HP, HP, Compaq, those were two huge companies that sold computers. And then Dell was probably the third largest. And they made deals. Microsoft went out and said, look, you're either going to offer our stuff, our operating system, and only our operating system, or we're going to charge you more for our operating system. So if you're selling millions and millions of computers and they're basically telling you, look, you can sell Microsoft DOS, we'll sell it to you for about $4. But if you're going to also provide the opportunity for people to use something called DR DOS or Dr. DOS, then what we're going to do is charge you $8. Right? Millions of computers, that's a ton of money. So places like, you know what, doesn't matter that much to us. We'll just go ahead and offer only Microsoft DOS. That's all we're offering. Now, on top of that, they put in some code that when you installed Windows, so Windows was just an overlay for DOS. It was a graphical system. And Windows, let's pull that up. Whoops, I closed that one by mistake. So we'll look at, this would have been Windows 3.0. 3.1 really took over things, but 3.0 was a big deal. And so 3.0, this is what 3.0 looked like. And here it goes. It's coming up. There it is. So basically what you would do is you install DOS, which actually ran was the operating system running the computer. And then this was installed on top of it and allowed a graphical interface to play little games and put things in windows, right? Little squares that you could do different things in. It's where it got its name from. And so Windows 3.0 was the one that they were dealing with at the time. And then Windows 3.1.1, which came out a little later. And so what they ended up doing was making sure there was some code in there. And the code would actually check your version of DOS. So it would take a look and say, are you running Microsoft DOS, right? And when you weren't, it would give some real cryptic error. So it wouldn't say, oh, you don't have Microsoft DOS installed, so I can't run. Because that isn't true. Dr. DOS or DR DOS was totally compatible with MS DOS, and they knew they would get sued if they just said, oh yeah, you got to have MS DOS. So instead, it gave this cryptic error, and people would be like, what is that error? And it wouldn't work, right? So what would somebody do? They would just go out and get MS-DOS. It didn't work on this one. Must be DR DOS's problem, right? It must be something wrong with that. And then, of course, it would work, right? It was just a simple code in there that just checked. Now, that is not winning through innovation. That is basically becoming large enough that you can stifle the competition and keep yourself on top. And that's the dark side, one of the dark sides, right? There's all sorts of dark sides of business that they try to get away with just because of money. But in the tech business, this is a dark side of tech business, that because you're making software, because you're making a piece of hardware, you can go ahead and make it difficult for other people. And several years later, Novell was a big networking company at the time, and they really had some good stuff. And that would always happen. So we're talking about late 90s by now. And every single time Microsoft would update Windows, and back then they did service packs, so it would be months and months, and then you'd get a disk and you would load the service pack on. It would make the networking not work every single time. Once is just once. Two is, well, there still could be a mistake. And then three, that's a pattern, right? And that would happen all the time because we use Novell networks. And Novell would then have to come out and get around Microsoft's little stop. And they would, tell people that, Microsoft is not dealing fairly in this situation. Of course, they eventually got sued and DR DOS won. But by then, the damage is done. And a better product that you had is gone. There was actually another product. So let's look this one up. Oops, that's not what we want. I thought I deleted that. So there was a graphical environment, something. No, I just want Gem OS. I mean, I don't know what that is. It looks kind of cool. But this was made by Digital Research. And so they actually made an operating system that you could have run on a Windows computer. And this was years before, right? So Windows 3.0 was probably around 90, 91. I can't remember exactly. And this came out in the 80s. So this would have been about 86, 87. Looks very much the same as what the other operating, it kind of looks like a in between a Mac and Windows. But this was there available, but nobody used it because Microsoft made it so you really couldn't do anything other than have them. Now, why mention that? Well, you need to realize that kind of stuff is going on, that it's not necessarily because you won't be using things necessarily because they're the best. You'll be using them because other people use them. And that's no big deal. For you personally, you do what you want, right? But when you're in an organization and hopefully someday, right, you're really influencing what happens within an organization, your name is going to be on the line. All right. You choose the wrong thing and people are like, I hate that. To let you know a little behind the scenes, we have a committee that we do every single year, and we get people from the community to be on that committee. Well, we don't live in a place where there's a lot of tech companies, right? We don't even deal with companies that have tech departments. So you got EAC, City of Safford, the county. You've got Freeport-McMoRan, but only a small portion because Freeport-McMoRan runs all their stuff out of Phoenix for the most part. I mean, the prisons do the same thing. So we have very few people in the tech world, right, that can actually sit on that. And so we always have the teachers on there from the different areas. And one of the things that was said last time was we were talking about Microsoft Office, whether we should continue to teach it, how valid is it, and all that stuff, because they're our contributing partners. They really tell us what to do. And somebody in there said, no teacher wants to use Google Docs. No teacher wants to use Google Sheets. We use it because the tech department is forcing us to use it. All right, so from that person's point of view, the tech department is full of idiots and they just do things and make them, make others do what they want, that they don't really figure out what does this person need, what would be best for them. Let's go ahead and pursue that. They just look and say, this is easiest for us, so we're going to go ahead and push it out there, right? And so they've got the power to do it and they do it. And that's the truth for a lot of situations. But those people, of course, will never move up or never move on into some other place. My brother operates a 6,000 student school. He's the head of their tech department, and that's not the way they operate. And he's received a lot of praise for that, and other job offers are there, because basically it's like, what's best? Let's put this stuff in front of our teacher. Now that's education, right? I don't want you to get confused here. You would do the same thing in a business. You would go, okay, we got Macs out there, right? We got Windows machines. Let's find out what would people use. IBM did this several years ago, and they ended up just growing their Mac program because it took less to support them. Now, I love Windows. This is a Windows machine that I'm running off of. But that wouldn't stop me from saying, well, let's take these, let's say we got 100,000 people at this one installation we're working at. Let's take these 100 people. Actually, you'd probably start with about 30. And then let's let them choose what they would like. And then we'll monitor the results, right? Because if we're going to do our job right, we are not going to also contribute to the dark side of tech business by just saying, we're going to strong arm you. We're going to want them to praise us, right? We want them to go, man, that tech department is so good. I hope they stay with us, right? So that's where it really ties in for you, is that if you're open-minded and you think about what you're doing and you go ahead and say, well, I'm going to use Chrome, right? Because that's what I like. Most people like whatever they've learned. That's an important thing. most people, right, back in the social theories, most people will use what they use because they've learned it, right? I always tell people that they'll come in to my Windows class and they're like, oh yeah, I love Windows, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic. We also teach Linux. And they, I really don't like that. Why? I don't actually say that because I know that why is because, well, they've really never used it. They don't really know. And so I say, well, most people like what they've used, right? So you like Windows 10 because that's what you've used all the time. You may really like Linux, but you don't really want to have to learn it, right? Tech people aren't any different than anybody else. You have to be different. You have to be the person that's going to go in and know this stuff already. If you were in a tech department, you would install Chrome, you would use Edge, you would use Opera, you would use Firefox, you would use all these different browsers so that you knew what are the advantages of using these. I mean, doing so does not take a ton of time. We're not talking about hours and hours and months of your time at all. We're talking about a few minutes. And then that way, if somebody wanted to, and they're like, why won't you guys let us use Firefox? Why can't we have that installed? You can either give them the reason why, or you would be able to say, oh, yeah, there's no reason why we can't do that. Let's just install that on your computer. And then you tell us which one you like to use and why, because that'll be important for us to know. So again, Microsoft kills the competition example, the dark side of tech business. This happens over and over again. It's something that you have to watch. Are they killing the competition because they're the biggest one? Because that's the way people behave. That's the way companies behave. All right, so that's the end of this video. I'm going to do a different one for a different video here. So stay tuned for that one.